Hi everyone, welcome to this month's Desteni I Process Relationship Success Support Series. This is a series that we walk every month looking at different aspects of relationships. This month we're going to be talking about long distance relationships. As always, we have Cerise Poolman joining us for her expertise and awesome perspective on relationships, as well as Kim and Paul, who are currently together happily, but are also walking a long distance relationship. And so they are here to share some awesome examples and the process they have and are currently walking together. We have the three of them joining me from South Africa. So hey guys, welcome. Glad you could be here.
Thanks for having us.
Hi,
nice to be here.
So just to be aware, there is a bit of a delay. So if you guys are seeing that on your end, just be aware of that. So yeah, we would be more than excited for you to join us in this discussion. If you have questions for Paul or Kim or Cerise, or you have perspective or your own experience you'd like to share, please do so through the Q&A app on the Google Plus page. We'll be discussing for about 40 minutes, so keep that in mind and get your questions in before that time. If you're watching from YouTube, click on Be a Part of this Discussion, and that will take you to the Google Plus page, and you can join in as you'd like. So we're going to get started here, and we're going to open up with the point of communication, because I think a lot of people can agree that communication is so important in any relationship, whether that's family or friends or partnerships. So from my experience, and I think from Kim and Paul, who are going to share with us their experience, communication is so important for long distance relationship, because ultimately that's all you have. There's not that physical interaction or interaction, and so what you have is either ear to ear or face to face communication, and that kind of is what creates and builds the foundation of a relationship. So why don't we start with Cerise, just giving maybe your perspective on communication in general relationships, why they're so important, and then maybe Kim and Paul can step in and let us know from your guys' experience what has been your process of building that communication. What have you seen in terms of when there's stable communication, when there's not, and kind of that kind of experience?
Okay, cool. So I absolutely agree with you that communication is probably, you could call it the foundation of any relationship. And it's also one of the most difficult things to develop, because what is, let's call it a tendency in our society, is that everyone is kind of talking a different language, even though they're talking the same language. Let me elaborate there, where everyone has different definitions for the same word. So when I say a word like love, not everyone will have the same definition or understanding of that word. So a lot of the time when people are communicating with each other and speaking to each other, there's a lot of misinterpretation going on. There's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstandings. And that is the foundation for a lot of conflict, and also a lot of difficulties in relationships, because people are not, let's say that it's very rare to be shown how to overcome these misunderstandings and to develop an effective communication with other people. It's not something that you're taught in school. You don't learn, okay guys, not everyone has the same definitions for the same words. Even though the dictionary may have certain definitions, your life experiences will give you different understandings and different interpretations of words. So for example, if you have negative experiences around a particular word, you might then embody those negative experiences and then associate negative emotions to that word, compared to another person who would be the complete opposite. So if you're trying to have a conversation with someone and you're in that particular situation, you're saying the same words, but you're meaning completely different things. And being able to stop for a moment and re-establish, okay, what are we actually saying to each other? Are we understanding each other effectively? That's a step that's often missed in any relationship, be it family, friends, or partnerships. So what would make long distance relationships, they may not actually be difficult in that respect, because it's aspect of sharing yourself and establishing that effective communication is, whether you're sitting face to face with the person in the same room or whether you're talking on the phone or via computer, it's the same thing. You have to follow the same steps in order to get to being on the same page with each other. So from that aspect, a long distance relationship, you maybe just have to work a little bit harder, and be a little bit more on your, let's just call it on your game, in order to see, okay, is there something that my partner, for example, is not considering, or is there something that's, their words are indicating that they're maybe not being completely open about a point, maybe even if it's they're not being completely honest with themselves. Whereas when you're in physical reality talking to someone and you're with them every day, you can kind of pick up on, okay, there's something going on in them, there's something they're struggling with, or there's whatever it is, you know, that, so that aspect I would say might be more difficult. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree with the point of when you're in the physical reality together, when you see each other face to face, you can pick up reactions a lot easier than it is just through text. With text, I mean, if you're not honest about your reaction, you can easily just kind of brush the person aside. Say that I'm busy with something else, and then with the physical reality, you're faced with that reaction. You can pick up on it with through their face, through their body, body language, through the body language, and just their tonality or things like that.
Yeah, like you can't escape each other in the physical reality. But I remember when we first were apart, the first time that he was here and he left, in our first conversation, I remember I went into emotional reaction to something he said in a specific way, where I felt like a fear of rejection came up within me, and then my immediate response to that was like hardening myself and going into a rejection of him and saying like, well, everything's fine over here, and like not actually going into sharing myself or sharing about my day or something. So within that point, like I could easily just brush him off and let it be, and then he would go about doing his things, and it's like we're not face to face anymore with each other, so it's like we can't point each other's reactions out, or we can't see it, that we're in a reaction.
That's actually a really good point that that I didn't go into enough, is that point of self-honesty is that much more important in a long-distance relationship, because your partner isn't there to support you, to say, hey, what's going on? You're reacting to something. You have to be the one to say, okay, I'm reacting, let's open it up. So that point of self-responsibility and self-honesty is that much more important when it's up to you to initiate those conversations.
Yeah. So my experience is a little bit different than Paul and Kim, because you guys initially met in the physical, right? And you guys spent some time together and decided you wanted to go into an agreement. And then you guys went and you had split up and you were apart. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So for me, I met my partner. I mean, I met him in the physical very briefly in passing. And then we didn't decide to go into the agreement together until we were just communicating online. So for us, it was strictly from a long distance standpoint from the beginning. And I found for me, learning how to communicate, we did Skype chats every day, and we practiced consistency with it. And I found that in that consistency of communication, we got to know when another person was reacting. So we weren't in the physical being able to pick up on body language or changes in behavior necessarily, but the consistency of how much we communicated, which was daily for us, really allowed us to kind of set a base and kind of see what was normal for the other person. And from there, we were able to develop that more in tune kind of observing of each other, and hey, I'm noticing this in you, what's going on. So did you guys find that when you split up, did you guys keep the communication consistent, or was it kind of more sporadic? How did you guys kind of work with that point in terms of the amount you guys communicated?
So for the most part, we were talking every day. Usually before and after I came and left for work. So we were talking every day. But there's always like what Kim was talking about when I first got back, that reaction that she was having, that existed for maybe 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, for a long time.
Oh, it wasn't too bad.
I remember it being one.
Okay. But so like I would say, like, you know, how are you doing, or how are things there? And she's just like, good. And then the conversation would end. There'd be nothing else. So, you know, like that point didn't sit well within me. Like, I was like, okay, maybe she's just not talking or busy. First day, and then the second day it was continuing. And so that was a signal point within me to then see, all right, you know, something's up here. The communication isn't as fluid as it was in the physical reality. So
yeah, but it took us a while to also, like you mentioned, to kind of pick up on what's not normal.
yeah.
You know, like those little moments of like not talking for a while, like in your mind you can justify it and think, oh well, he's just busy, or I'm just busy. You can make up all sorts of excuses as to why things are the way they are, but like deep down in yourself you can feel it, that things aren't fluent and things aren't going naturally. So it takes a while to get that basis of, you know, this is who he is, this is who I am, and this is how we are together. You know, where things flow and you just feel that it's all like natural when you talk. But that comes only after you've like over a long period of time have talked and already like walked through reactions and, you know, already confronted each other with lots of things, where you can feel when a reaction releases and everything goes back to normal. You know, it's like you can feel that switch and you can identify it easily.
Absolutely. And I would say that's when communication becomes a cross-reference. You can really use it, I mean, to kind of look at, okay, well, what's going on? Where are we? Is the relationship stable, or the individual stable? Because it will be quite revealing in how you're communicating, as you said. So, Cerise, do you have any perspective of this, or in terms of that self-honesty and self-responsibility when it comes to communication? What are some of the consequences that you see from people holding back or allowing reactions, or, you know, not being willing to open up and share what is going on?
Well, excuse me. In any relationship, when you're not being open, generally the kind of consequences that you're going to be looking at are from relatively extreme, where the relationship ends or generates a lot of conflict all the time, to maybe, let's call it, less extreme points where it's like conflict or feeling like you don't know where you stand with each other, or feeling like your partner is hiding something from you. Also, it might manifest as a feeling of a lack of intimacy, which is quite an interesting point and relevant to this particular discussion, because the general perception of intimacy is that it comes from physical intimacy, or that it's based in physical intimacy. But I mean, when you're in a long distance relationship, obviously that is not there. So you have to create another form of intimacy with your partner that doesn't rely on physical interactions. And I think that gives you an opportunity to really see what real intimacy can be in terms of sharing, being completely open with someone and letting someone see who you are and get to know who you are completely, the good and the bad, the pretty and the ugly, the whole shebang. So though it does, from a perspective, take some courage, because a lot of people are walking through points of shame or self-judgment, and a lot of the time that does hold them back, which is a pity, because everyone is kind of walking through these points because of the way that, let's say, the way that the world is at the moment, the way that humanity is at the moment. And by keeping it in, you're not really dealing with it, and you're also not, by not expressing it, you're not sharing your experience with others, and therefore giving others the opportunity to learn from you. Can you guys think of any other consequences, so back to the original question, any other consequences of not being open with your partner?
Well, I mean, in terms of a long distance relationship, when there is conflict, Kim and Paul, have you guys experienced this? For me, it was like, if there was any moment of conflict that wasn't resolved, where my partner and I were being direct with each other about what was going on, if that wasn't existing, it kind of seemed like there was more uncertainty. There was like more of this doubt, because already we weren't in the same location, and then you add a lack of communication, and it kind of exemplified this just this negative experience around the relationship. Did you guys find that that was the case for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When there's no intimacy and openness, then you're sharing yourself, like you're making yourself vulnerable, and you're like putting up a wall towards your partner, which can consist of, for instance, in most relationships, like the way relationships are designed is that people have like ideas in their mind about why it is that we can't talk about certain things, or how we're supposed to behave towards our wife or our husband or boyfriend, girlfriend. And that can form like a wall where you don't share specific things. And when you don't share yourself, it's like the other person, as well as yourself, kind of has the space to create ideas, perceptions, and beliefs about what's going on with the other person, because they're not sharing. So, obviously that is like a soil for emotions to come up and for all sorts of things to go on in your own mind, because you're simply not having a grounding point in reality, because you don't really know what's going on. So I've also found that as well, like when you know that there's something your partner isn't sharing, or you don't specifically know it, but you can feel it. It's like you can feel that there is like a wall there, and you can't even define it. But eventually, when you get to that point of where something opens up, and eventually you talk about things after a long period of not talking about things and emotional unrest, then it's like the wall crumbles and you can see things so much more clearly. So that's where you really see what you create when you don't share yourself, and when you're not intimate or vulnerable or open with yourself towards your partner.
Absolutely. Just that word intimacy, a little bit about what you're saying, Kim, and Cerise, what you had mentioned earlier too. For me, I found a long distance relationship, especially starting out, creating a relationship within the context of long distance, was really supportive for me, specifically for me, because my past kind of pattern was to go straight for the energy and the desire and the rush of that new experience being in a relationship. And I didn't really understand, or I don't know if I ever really learned how important getting to know someone is, and like learning how to communicate. I was really just, blinded by that energy and that positive experience. So for me, I found the long distance relationship, while it was initially really challenging because it challenged kind of my nature, in the end it was so supportive, and I found this deeper experience of care and consideration for my partner that I had never really experienced in relationships before. Can you guys maybe talk a little bit about that in terms of past relationships and the relationship you're in now, in terms of the difference being that it's long distance? Can you see any differences in that, in terms of how things are being developed?
Yeah, I absolutely can. My past relationships have been where I just haven't shared myself at all. I've been the type of person to suppress a lot of things and keep them bottled up and not share them, and kind of almost expect my partner to know immediately, rather than getting to open up and share myself with them in that point of intimacy. And from that point, the past relationships haven't worked because I didn't allow myself to open up and get them to know me. And so with it being long distance at the moment, I've had to push myself to go past those patterns of, I go into a point of self-judgment or shame or something, and I just kind of lock myself down. I've had to push myself to open up myself and explain the point and look at other dimensions, and even push myself to support myself in the self-judgment or shame or whatever may go on. Because I realize that if I don't, then the communication is still just going to be like hitting this wall, like you said, and it's not going to flourish into that understanding of who each other is and actually getting to know the person and them getting to know you.
Yeah, great. Do you guys have anything to add to that? Because otherwise I would like to go on to a next topic.
Nobody satisfied?
Yeah.
Good. So I want to talk a bit about future projections, because in my experience with the 2-year long distance I walked, future projections came up a lot, and just imagining being with that person and what it's going to be like when I get to see them again, and kind of going into that excitement energy. But I also found there were consequences in that, which were really kind of fighting against the reality of the situation, and that we're not in the same physical environment. So I found that it really supported me to realize and live the saying of work with what is here, or working in the physical. So Cerise, do you maybe want to give us a little bit of your perspective of some of those principles that we work with in Desteni, in terms of working with what is here and working in the physical? And then maybe Kim and Paul, you guys can talk about how the long distance relationship has supported you within that.
Okay, so the point of projecting things into the future is a pretty common point, not only in relationships or long distance relationships, but in a lot of areas of our lives. We do have a tendency, especially to project very positive outcomes into the future, and then kind of live according to this hope that these things will happen one day somehow magically. Now, in order to change that pattern, you have to start recognizing what is, let's say, what's real. That is a bit of an extreme word maybe in this case, but I think it's for now the best word. So let's say that you're working with something or you're planning something. In order to plan it effectively, you need to be able to assess what you're dealing with, looking at what are the points that are relevant to this particular, let's call it a project. Look at the physical resources that are involved, the time required to do to move through the certain phases in the project. How long do things actually take? Because that's another common fallacy within people, is misjudging how long something will take. We need to get better at judging time and looking at how things actually really move in reality, and how long it takes to move. So the point of, let's make it more relevant to relationships. The most common tendency in a relationship is imagining how wonderful your life is going to be with your partner in the future, and how great the sex is going to be, and what a good time you're going to have, and how beautiful your kids are going to be. These are generally, let's say, they're generally born from very typical fantasies that most people possess, which are coming from things like movies, storybooks, fairy tales, and whatever. These are all the beliefs and perceptions and judgments of what life is supposed to be like and what life could be like. And a lot of the time we get lost in that fantasy and don't look practically at what does it actually take to build that life, and what does it take to maintain that life, and what do you need to do to create that life. Because let's face it, relationships are hard work no matter where you are in the world. It takes commitment, it takes dedication, it takes patience, and it takes an absolute willingness to walk that path with that person. And when you're floating around in the fantasies of how amazing your life is going to be 6 months from now, you tend to forget about everything that it actually takes, or everything that it requires to create the relationship in order to get to where you would like to be. So why don't you guys take the floor?
Well, we've obviously, with him living in Canada and me being from Belgium, right now I'm in South Africa on a farm, but you know, I'm a Belgian citizen, and we've obviously looked at where are we going to stay, how can we be together when I leave the farm, which is a year from now. And within that, we've obviously gone into, like Cerise is saying, that's a tendency that the mind simply has, is to create those projections and to already have expectations and desires and like kind of preoccupy yourself in that. We've had to face many obstacles already, where we got to many moments where we really believed like it's just impossible to be together. And what I found is that a very automatic response to that is like, okay, let's just give up. This isn't working, you know. It's like this overwhelming experience of defeat just comes over you, and you just want to let everything go and drop everything and just say, you know, I'm stopping this. And, you know, it's taken us each time to just pick ourselves up and realize, like, okay, this experience of defeat is not real, because it's something we've created by going into those future projections in our own mind, by generating desires, expectations, and preoccupying ourselves in the fantasy world in our mind, and we haven't looked at things in a practical way. So I'm only experiencing this defeat right now because inside of myself I was believing in things without knowing or seeing how reality actually works. So now it's up to me and up to us to investigate reality and, you know, make decisions and live in a way that is based on an insight into how reality works, how things actually are, and not go and experience things based on ideas and beliefs and, you know, how we want things to be. Because, you know, you have to be realistic. Obviously, if you want to tell yourself fairy tales, then you have to be prepared for that disappointment and defeat, and then, you know, your relationships are going to end up in a breakup, obviously, eventually, because fairy tales aren't real. So it's kind of a choice that you have to make for yourself.
Yeah, and to add to the future projections in relation to you know, how the sex is going to be, you know, imagining meeting your partner and that like a positive experience, you know, the slow-mo movie airport run where they just run into each other's arms and grasp each other. Yeah, it triggers in a lot of people. So when I came here in February, we both went into that, you know, that expectation, that high energy, positive feeling of, oh, I'm going to get to see my partner now. And when I came out of the doors at the airport, we both stared at each other and it was basically, who the hell is this person? Yeah, because within the future projections, you're creating this idea of your partner in how you want to see them and how things are going to play out. And most of the time, it's no way in line with the physical reality of how you communicate, how you interact. It's all of these jump-based moments of positive ideas and positive imagery. And yeah, to let that go is probably going to really support a long-distance relationship because, as you said, you work with what's here. When you see each other within the physical, there's no previous ideas that you're trying to mold yourself into or mold yourself or mold your partner into. It's just work with what's here. And yeah, in that you're comfortable. You're not tense and trying to create this idea. It's just basically yourself here as it always has been. And it becomes more fluid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found also that if I ever went on a visit to see my partner when we were long distance from each other and there was disappointment, it's because I knew there was an expectation I had created. So again, you know, the physical is a great cross-reference for assessing, okay, where have I been actually? And then there were moments when there was no expectation and the physical meeting was great and we flowed and there was no conflict or issue. And from there, I knew that I had supported myself walking up to that moment. So for me personally, I found the long distance to be really cool in terms of a direct example or practice of what it means to, you know, take it one day at a time, one moment at a time, just like working with my day, with what is here, because my partner wasn't here. So if I was thinking about my partner, or if I was in my mind, he's not here in the physical. So it was really kind of cool for me, just learning how to live that and like what it meant to really assess reality. But I want to go now a little bit more into the future projection in the context of sex, because long distance relationships obviously are missing that dimension of it. So if you guys are comfortable, maybe if you want to talk about a little bit of that, I mean, how has that point come up for you guys being long distance, and how have you been able to support in that relationship, the part of the relationship?
Do you maybe have something to say about the topic first?
So for me, what's been assisting is, you know, each time that I leave or separate myself from within the physical, the best thing for me is to make an agreement with myself and a commitment of just saying, you know, I'm not going to have sex for this amount of time, and you stand equal to that. And if the desires or thoughts come up, I remind myself of that agreement, and it's easy to be let go of within that moment. So, you know, it doesn't linger. It's not like a desire that comes up. It's just like, oh, you know, right, yeah, no, I'm not going to have sex for this amount of time. I let it go. And yeah, that's been the best thing to support myself within it so far.
Yeah, something I've also found is that like the closer the time comes that you know you're going to be together, the more it becomes difficult to like not go into the sexual urges, because it's like, you know, it's going to happen and it's right there around the corner.
Yeah.
But when you know that it's like still a year until I meet this person, so might as well just not go there at all. So it's really like a decision that you make with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of like working with stopping sexual desires, it's really just a matter of just how you stop any addictions, not participate in it, and it becomes easier over time. So, yeah.
Cerise, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I might want to shall we go into the intimacy point in relation to lack of sexual intimacy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So a lot of things that, or maybe a lot of long distance relationships might experience a feeling of a lack of intimacy because of that lack of physical intimacy. And then might try and find some kind of compensation within someone in their immediate reality in their life. Now, this is obviously born from the misunderstanding of what intimacy is, and the misunderstanding that yes, while sexuality is a part of the human design, it is a part of self-expression, it is not something that sexual interaction with someone does not necessarily create intimacy, and feeling like you're lacking intimacy in your relationship, whether it's long distance or not, is an indication of that lack of your foundation of communication. And sorry, Christina, we've lost you. Are you still there?
I do hear you guys, so I'm not sure. I see my videos out, but
okay, all right. So I'm just going to carry on, and then when you come back, then oh, there you are.
go ahead.
Okay, so it's important to not allow yourself to fall into that trap of desiring that sexual interaction and saying, look, I can't deal with this long distance relationship because I don't feel like we have any intimacy. That's just a misconception. Intimacy is something that can be created by communication and sharing. And obviously the kind of basic idea of any long distance relationship is that it's in a sense it's temporary. You know, you're not going to be apart forever. There will be, for some people, you know, it may be difficult if one of the partners is working abroad for long periods of time, but you do get those times together, and that is the time where you do access that sexual intimacy and you can tap into that. But it doesn't mean that when you're apart that you don't have to define your relationship according to whether or not you have that sexual interaction. So
yeah, that's a great point. And I think for a lot of us too, relationships and sex are so intertwined in terms of defining a relationship based on sex. Like that just goes hand in hand when some really amazing, strong relationships can be built without that. And I think long distance proves that it's not necessary. For those that have done it and walked it, have kind of proven to themselves that like you said, Cerise, sex is part of the human experience, but it's not limited to just that. And then just a general question I have, I don't know about you guys, but for me, what I've noticed throughout life or in relationships is the idea of long distance relationships have always been kind of deemed as not worth it, don't do it. You know, it's kind of like if a couple happens to go into a long distance or they are going to be apart for a long period of time, it's kind of like, well, it's not going to work out, you should probably just end it. Is this something that you guys noticed also, and anything to say about that? I mean, I find that's interesting, that the kind of first reaction to anyone who has to potentially walk a long distance relationship is don't do it, you know, the relationship is deemed to fail. You guys have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I've got that a lot from a lot of people in my reality back home, where I tell them about Kim and like, oh shit, like, is that working? Do you trust her?
Yeah.
You know, that's the immediate questions that come up, and then it's like, wow, that must be so difficult. I'm like, the communication point is the biggest thing. As long as you have that, it's easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, as you say it, like it's kind of like a pre-programmed belief system that exists in just the general mind of people, and it only goes to show how much we've defined our relationships based on sex. Basically, much we've kind of taken for granted that we don't really know our partner. Like, we don't value them as an individual. We don't have that kind of special connection, like where you are with the person because you know who they are, or you're willing to get to know who they are. You're walking a similar process together, or a similar, journey together, and you value each other for those things, where it doesn't matter if you're together or not physically. And that's also something very valuable that I've learned in my relationship with Paul. And that's something that I know I will never lose, and I would never have experienced if it wasn't for me applying myself and applying the Desteni tools of, getting to know myself, getting to know my partner, and getting to know my reality, and like really pushing myself to go beyond my accepted limitations and, mind boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say if anyone is able to walk a long distance relationship, it could probably really support in some new experiences in terms of breaking down some ideas you have about what a relationship is meant to be or is defined as. But what about, long distance relationship? For me, my partner and I were devoted to Skype, and it really supported in us being able to keep our relationship together while we were apart. But we found that it could get a little routine, and every day was kind of the same point. We would get on the chat, we would talk, we would discuss. What have you guys found to kind of make the communication, building, and interaction creative and fun, being that you are a bit limited to how you're communicating or interacting? Did you guys, what have you done? I mean, is it just strictly chatting? Have you guys, like for me and my partner, we would like watch movies together on Skype. We would like time the playback at the same time, or we would, do like redefining words or stuff like that. Have you guys tested out any different ways to kind of keep the interaction not new, but not so routine?
Creating projects for ourselves. So like it does get boring every so often, just saying like, all right, I'm off to work now, okay, see you, things like that. So we do create times, like I think it was maybe once a week. Yeah, once a week, where we would work on redefining words. And that's helpful to give each other things to work on as a team, so to speak. So it's not just that typical day-to-day conversation.
Yeah, if anything, moments where we weren't giving ourselves and each other things to do, and things were like just coming up and you're like just shooting the shit, just talking about stuff, we found that gets boring much more easily, even though it looks like you're having fun together. But when you're like really doing things together, like, okay, let's do a self-forgiveness session together, or let's work on exploring this word together, then things become interesting because you are challenged, you're challenged in figuring something out or creating a solution for something, which is a nice experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that also. The self-forgiveness especially was really fun, and the redefining words. It was a great excuse. Like, there is no excuse in terms of, oh, we don't have anything to talk about. Sometimes you would go into those points where it's like, well, there's nothing for us to talk about, and then maybe you're reacting to that. You give yourself these projects like redefining words, and there is no excuse. There is always something you can kind of do or direct yourself within, and so it's a great example. So I was just looking at the last points. I mean, we're 44 minutes into the Hangout. If you guys have any last points you want to discuss, maybe overall the pros and cons that you have, that you see in relation to long-distance relationships. I mean, you guys have walked both now, so anything you want to share about that?
Well, I would just say that long distance relationship or not, I mean, suppose a long distance relationship can be a nice test for the relationship and for who you are in relation to all those points that we discussed, like sexual desires and all the things that can as reasons for why apparently a long distance relationship can't work. So if you can prove to yourself that you can make it work, then you can, you know, prove to yourself that you have the dedication and the commitment to see something through and to, you know, create something in your life and not give up. So that's, you know, I suppose that's something that you can take with a long distance relationship.
No, I like that.
Cool.
Cerise, any last words from you as our relationship expert?
I can't think of anything at the moment.
Maybe one more thing I do want to discuss is Paul touched on it just a little bit a moment ago about that trust aspect of a long-distance relationship. Obviously, kind of the program nature of relationships, there can be a lot of jealousy. Obviously, it depends on the person, but there can be a lot of jealousy and distrust. What have you guys found in your experience? I mean, for me personally, because my partner and I were walking, you know, the Destiny process together, and we had specific principles that we were applying in our lives. I found for the first time the relationship, I didn't have a lot of distrust, being that we were so far apart. I found that I trusted him because I trusted myself, and I kind of knew where he stood and I knew where I stood. And from that, I found a lot of stability when it came to trust in the long distance relationship. Was that something that you guys found as well, or was there any issues that came up in relation to the trust in terms of not being in the same environment and kind of those worries that can come up in relationships?
No, not really much.
Well, obviously there is a point of being aware that your partner doesn't have access to your sexuality and that he might possibly, you know, go out and meet someone and accidentally almost, you know, fall into bed with and I mean, I faced those points where also perception wise sometimes you might, for instance, see that or hear that he made a friend or he met someone at work, and you know the reactions come up because it's like pre-programmed relationship stuff in your mind. So then obviously you have to now be honest with yourself about where all of this is coming from, because if I allow myself to go into emotional reactions geared towards him, and I go into like emotional manipulation where I like make the decision to not talk to him for a while, to like punish him for what I think are his transgressions, things like that, then I'm going to, you know, sabotage my relationship with him, because he's also not going to trust me anymore, because now he knows that I'm going to turn sour whenever I only perceive that something's going on in his life. And you know, it's also I think where women, a lot of women, because we become so emotional so easily and we allow ourselves to go into it, create that kind of distrust with our partner, because it's like we go into an almost attack towards our partner every time we become emotional, every time we become jealous or blame them for what we think they did wrong. It's like we don't realize that while we experience ourselves as the victim, we are attacking them and causing them to only drift farther and farther away from us. So yeah, that's, you know, a fascinating point where you can apply the tools of stabilizing yourself and taking self-responsibility, being self-honest, not allowing yourself to go into those emotional sabotaging reactions.
Yeah, awesome. Definitely can relate to that, Kim, and definitely agree. It really just goes to show that it's up to you, because I found too, if I felt like my partner was doing something deliberately to me, I would go into attack, and I would attack, and I would see what kind of rift that would create or conflict it would create. And it was like, oh my gosh, what am I creating? Because it's my behavior that's doing this. And so it's really, someone told me once, and I'm sure it can be applied to long distance or face-to-face relationships, it really comes down to you changing. It's not about your partner. It's not about anyone else. It's really about you making that decision to change and taking that responsibility. So very cool. I do have a comment from Andres Felipe Tenho, and he's saying, cool guys, thanks. So thanks for watching, Andres. I think we'll wrap it up if you guys don't have anything else to add to the Hangout.
Well, maybe let's end it on the point that we might look at doing the next Hangout on, which is the point of how to share and how to work through your reactions with your partner. Because a very common misconception is that if you're having particular thoughts, like let's say you're having a jealous reaction or you're angry with your partner for doing something, the tendency is to kind of keep it into yourself, and that gradually builds up a resentment and starts coming out in like these nasty little comments to your partner, or being spiteful, whatever. That misconception that you shouldn't talk about things, that there are certain subjects that you shouldn't talk about, especially even like when you find someone else attractive, that resistance, that unwillingness to discuss those topics is very often what can cause little rifts in relationships, because the reality is that all of these things are not necessarily who you are. The thoughts that come up within your mind are most of the time programmed into you. And when you are in a relationship, you have the opportunity to support yourself by having someone that you're walking with who can help you deconstruct these patterns, deconstruct this programming within you. And that is not limited to everything that you are allowed to talk to your partner about, and all the things that you're not allowed to talk to your partner about, you need to try and deal with on your own. That's not how it works. So I think this Hangout is going to be about how to really build that aspect of communication and how to build that aspect of being able to speak about absolutely anything with your partner.
Yeah, that's awesome. That will be a great support Hangout, because I think that, yeah, that is, people don't want to talk about certain things, like, you're attracted to someone else and it maybe is causing some kind of experience within you, and it's like you automatically think you can't talk about it with your partner. Well, why not? I mean, so that's great. That's a great Hangout. Definitely looking forward to that. And so that will be in 1 month's time when Cerise will be back for the Relationship Success Hangout. So stay tuned for that. This week, keep your eyes open for the Desteni Movie Hangout on Friday, and we'll be back next week also for our weekly Desteni I Process live Google Hangout with the Practical Self-Empowerment series that we have been walking. So thanks, Kim, Paul, and Cerise for joining me. It was an absolute pleasure, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.